Any questions, and then we get on to the fun stuff. Yeah.
I've got a couple questions real quick.
Yeah.
Are there any economies right now, any countries practicing God's economic template?
No.
With two, if I have a debt,
Yep.
what is my incentive for paying it off if it's forgiven in 7 years?
Good question. So if the first question was, are there any economies in the world today that are following God's economic system? No, there are none. They're all Babylonian, every single one of them. They're just, every ism out there is just another word for the same thing. It's a rose by any other name is still a rose. Any ism is still Babylon. There is no kingdom country out there. The other question was, what's my incentive to pay back debt if it's going to be automatically paid off, in 7 years? Okay, so you have to understand that the reason to pay off your debt is twofold. One is, unless you do, you don't get back your collateral. Okay, and your until 25 years, and we use 25 instead of 50 years for the Jubilee. And there's lots of reasons for that. And all I'll say is we couldn't figure out how to make 50 work when people are going to join something over time versus joining it all at once, because some people would be joining in the 50th year, right? And then what do you do then? Okay. Or in the 49th year or something. So that would be a problem. So we couldn't figure out how to make that work, so we just split the difference and said we'll just take half of it, and may God forgive us if we screwed up. And I'm sure we've screwed up on something, but hopefully he'll reveal what we need to know over time. So how do you have an incentive to pay off debt? Well, the first thing is you'll lose your collateral for 25 years, not 50, not just 7, okay? And the amount of loss of value in that could be really high, okay? If the economy grows, you could lose many, many, many times the value of what you lost. The second is that you can't borrow more from that same collateral. Now you may be saying, well, so what? I got it, and well, I can't because I don't have it anymore. I gave it up. So the person, here's the principle in God's economy, and you have to understand this. And this took a while to get. Everybody in Israel was to work on function 2, grow the economy of Israel. Everybody won when everybody won, and everybody lost when everybody lost. Okay. So if we lose the nation, we all lose. If we keep the nation growing and gunning, we all win. In fact, our return is better for everybody, the wealthy and the non-wealthy, and our risks are lower. So we get a better return on lower risk. So this means that people that basically want to have rentier behavior, not allowed. That's why you can't get more out in points than you create through your commerce in contribution to crop. You might not do the contribution yourself. It might come through your partner because of that 50-50 sharing thing. But you have to, you can't get more. So no rentier behavior. And the other is that no kind of scapegoating, except what you want is you want the debt to, in essence, move to the economy. So the reason for forgiving debt is that people that are in debt so a positive motivation is actually better over time than a negative motivation. So negative motivations, fear, is actually really good at getting you to make a quick decision, but is really bad at sustaining the decision over time. And so when you are enslaved, when you owe debt that you're working for and are enslaved, and you're doing your work just to pay the debt, you're nowhere near as motivated as if you are doing your work to basically go to Hawaii with your family. Okay, now what helps the economy more? You paying off your debt? No, that helps the creditor who basically gave you the money, but it doesn't help the economy because you're not as productive. So it's actually better to basically say, if you can't pay your debt back in 7 years for reasons that you should be motivated to do, because you're going to lose the future value of your yield rights for potentially a couple years, and you're not able to actually access more of your collateral because it's tied up, so you can't actually get more. You know, like your credit limit was going up, but you couldn't use it, okay? Because you're not servicing your debt. Then what happens is that in essence, it's better for the economy to take over the debt and let it be paid off through the whole system from points from everybody in all their commerce, so that the creditor who used their idle asset to get money gets made whole from the economy than it is for the economy to hold you accountable. Now, what happens in this is crazy. Risk goes way down. Okay, so what if you could make, so for both the investor and for the borrower? Okay, so what if you could borrow money, and you had an idea, like starting a coffee shop in Reading, and you were going to call it, what's the place next door? Evergreen, and you had this really cool idea. And so you get some people to contribute yield rights to you, so you can use the yield rights to start your coffee shop, so you'll have zero expense because you get enough points every month to pay everything, okay? You get them to give that up. They agree to do that for 5 years because they say, hey, you know what, look, if you don't have this thing cash flowing in 5 years to basically do this on your own, I want my yield rights back, okay? So they in 5 years, if you're a flop, they get their rights back no matter what. You got your principal back, but their very existence, they paid people, they did stuff in the economy, they spent their points, all that created more crop, all of that grew the economy, which made your yield rights more valuable. Even though you basically didn't get a return, I didn't get any interest, okay, well, big deal, because your yield rights are now worth more. Now, for the people that started this thing, if they have a flop, they don't have to go bankrupt. They don't have to basically file for bankruptcy to get out of their debt, which you wouldn't have got anything back anyway. They can just walk away. No harm, no foul, okay? They can restart. They learned a bunch of lessons. The employees that they did learned a bunch of lessons. If you look at things on an economic scale, things like the crash of the market that led to the dot-com crash actually created the conditions that trained people how to build Facebook, how to build TikTok, how to build all these companies that have created so much more economic activity than was lost in the crash. What you want is neither the investor, the lender, or the recipient to be held long-term accountable. You want them to have an incentive to pay it off because they have opportunity costs that they're missing. You want them to invest wisely because I can get a return and get increased value in my yield rights, both. But you want them to have the safety net that their decision-making about where that money should go has no downside in the end. Okay, this is the plan of salvation. I can continue to sin and still go to heaven. But if I do, I won't be as blessed. Here, now.
So, I just wondering, you have credit cards now, will there not be any unsecured debt then?
So in essence, you can still have unsecured debt, but my personal feelings, this isn't anything from the word or anything, my personal feelings is that credit cards should be limited to the amount of the value of your yield rights in the economy to get them at no interest, okay? And I'm not suggesting you should charge interest either, because that's a bad thing. I mean, I have the math to prove that's stupid. It's like stupid, stupid, stupid. It's really good if you want to be a rentier who's got a bunch of money that you made, and now you want to basically be lazy and live in your big house and fly in your helicopter and plane everywhere and go to places and be a big honcho that everybody bows down to and tries to worship and serve, okay, try to get you, I got to get close to so-and-so because they have all the money for me in my dream. That's really good if you want to be that person, but that's not what God wants anybody to be. What he wants people to be is people that have that respect in the economy because they are so familiar with his word, they can write it with their own hand. That they are so seeped in the meditation of his word that they understand what it actually means. And that they can deal with really complicated, difficult problems, like two women who basically are saying, that's my baby, and come up with the solution to that problem based on truth, and who can recognize the difference between counterfeit, what's of Satan, and what's of the kingdom of heaven. That's who we are supposed to be respecting. That's who leaders are. That's who's supposed to be in leadership. Anyway. One more question. All right. Let's take a break, 10 minutes again, because we're still catching up due to technical difficulties at the beginning. And we're going to go to the fun session, okay, where we get you to talk and we actually do the workshop part. All right. Thank you, everybody. Huh? We're in the home stretch. Okay. Grab your seat again. And this is when it's going to start getting fun and real. I apologize in some ways that I had to take you through the last session, but if I didn't, I wouldn't have given you a foundation. You don't have to understand everything. All I wanted to give, it's one of these things where if you open the can, you kind of have to like dump it out, right? Because it just won't keep if you don't. But the only thing you have to walk away, you don't have to understand all the stuff. There's a couple things I want you to walk away with from the last session. The first is how good God is, because he has set up an economic system that no matter what happens, he gave us the recipe to have an economy where we could lose our most valuable possession and get it back as a result of a calamity or as a result of a unwise action. Just like he set up a system for us as a result of our sin to get redemption, as a result of ignorance or as a result of foolish, sinful heart. In both cases, doesn't matter which it is, he paid the debt. Doesn't matter whether it's calamity or unwise action. He designed a system for a war zone, which we live in, which is a war zone, that would have for the benefit of all of us to live in. And that system can be implemented today legally, technically, everything can be implemented today so that it mirrors what he set up for Israel, which includes things like no interest. And the one thing I didn't mention, because I yanked it out, but none of this requires you to do anything. It's all going to be encoded in an app or apps, websites, other things, because all handled by back-ends that are all entirely automated, so you don't have to do anything. And now we get to talk about, there's one thing I want to mention. I feel like God's telling me to mention, because I didn't put this in to the deck because it was, it's too much. But all of this funds the 23.33%, not of the cash, but of the value, those squares and yield rights, goes to the same things that God told Israel to spend money on, which we've misunderstood. We think that, and we're told that tithing, we're supposed to give our tithe, the 10% to the church. Actually, the passage in Malachi is talking about bringing all the tithes. It was actually not about you. It was about collectively. If you collectively, then you get the benefit, not you. If you read the passage, you'll figure it out. It's like super obvious. It was the nation. If the nation will do this, so if the economy will give not 10, 23.33 is what the number was, okay, all the tithes into the storehouse, then these blessings will be yours. I have the math to prove that statement. And God said, test me. to see if this will happen. Not because, I'm not saying that he doesn't give you favor and stuff when you're generous and when you give to your local church or whatever. That's not the point. He loves a generous heart. It says that in the New Testament. But the promise of Malachi was about us collectively. If we as a group do this, you will get these blessings that are so big, you will not be able to contain it. I can prove that that's a mathematical reality. I have the math to prove it. What that money was supposed to go for wasn't the pastor, the equivalent of the pastor. Equivalent of the pastor today would be kind of a priest. Okay, the priests were to get 1%, not 10, because the tithe, the 10% tithe went to Levites. Out of that tithe, 10% went to the priests. Levites were not all priests. Only Aaron's descendants were priests. So that 1%, a tithe on a tithe, a tenth of a tenth, went to the priest. That was to support the sacrifices. Well, what did the other 90% go to? Two major activities. One was creating trust in commerce, creating trust in society, that people would adhere to the agreements, that they were dealing with one another in truth, that the claims they made about things were true and valid, and that disputes were settled and whatnot, and of course marrying and burying. That's what about half of the tithe went to. The other half went to education, but not education like a public school system, education that taught people the protocols of God to create the culture of God that would sustain the economy of God. Okay? That's what it's for. Well, what did the other 13.33 go to? 3.33 was a tithe of 10% every 3 years, and that was to go to the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner. Okay, now a foreigner would have been, in essence, an immigrant, somebody who was either displaced person from another place and was homeless, or somebody who was moved to Israel because they thought it was better to live with these guys than the place I'm living. So it's either somebody who's lost the ability to live where they are, like an exile, or somebody who wants to come here and live in Israel because it's a good place. Because, man, the way you guys run things is really cool. I want to be part of that. And it wasn't given as like a stipend like today. It was once every 3 years. So it wasn't and they were given a lump amount, and they weren't given cash. It wasn't gold and silver they were given. They were given commodities. Okay? They would have had to do something with them. When they did that something with it, it would have created economic growth. The other 10%, this is really good news, was spent on the 3 great feasts. You had to consume 10% of all of your income in effectively, maybe a couple weeks, including the travel time and stuff, could have been 3 weeks, that you had to consume in celebration with your family and worship with your family and storytelling with your family. It's the equivalent of media today. It's the equivalent of vacations and church camp kind of combined today, conference, that kind of thing. That's what 10%. My wife and I, when we had a business, we tried to actually live this way. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard to consume 10% when you have wealth. It's hard to consume 10% on these activities. And so what we found you had to do to consume, it was hard. I mean, you couldn't spend it. So what we did is we ended up, we'd invite people to go. We'd invite people to go. And people thought we were like the wealthiest people on the planet when we were just like upper middle class, because, we'd take the pastors or, the interns or whatever, go to Hawaii, whatever, because the people that couldn't afford it. But it was only because we were trying to burn up 10% of our income. And, if you make $500,000, it's like $50,000. I mean, and if you're like smart about buying tickets, you can buy a lot of tickets to Hawaii for $50,000. Let me tell you. Anyway, that's what's supposed to happen. That's what's supposed to occur. We're supposed to be the happiest, most celebratory. Anyway, that's what gets funded by all this. Yeah. So now we get to some fun. We want to tell you kind of where things are at, and then we want you to talk about stuff you're doing, and I want to give you some veins in telling you where we're at that people might be interested in participating in. Because what we're doing is we're founding a colony in a new country. I want to thank Ed Savoso for this analogy. Ed is really, really good at taking complex ideas and taking them down to a really simple set of words. And I've been trying to figure out how to explain this to people for a long time. And he said, what you're talking about is Plymouth. I said, what? Yeah, you're talking about founding a colony. So we want to create this virtual country, and we want to move to this virtual place without moving anywhere, where the laws are God's laws, where the way we work with one another is based on commerce and stuff that comes from Jesus and Moses, not from, the Democrats or the Republicans, or whatever group controls your country. That's what we want. And so to do that, we want to found a colony. Now, when people founded the colonies in the United States, there were lots of people that worked hard to try to get the people to go who didn't go initially. There were a lot more people that worked to get people to the colony to start with than actually went on the first boats. And then over time, more people came, and then it became a flood. And people came because of the promise of this America, this place that was this new country. They were doing things differently. They were doing things new ways. And there was prosperity where there was persecution, there was freedom, there was all these things that people left their old country to come to. And so that place became attractive because of the people that founded the colonies. Without the people that founded the colonies, there never would have been an attractive place to go to. And I'm not trying to say that America is like perfect, because it's not. It's like super not perfect. And I'm not trying to say that the original people doing the colonies were doing everything right in terms of God's word, because they weren't. Particularly the guys in Jamestown, but that's another story. But here's the point. When you are trying to do something new, you want to go somewhere and you need people to go along with you. So what happened during COVID, God had given me all this revelation, and I didn't know what to do with it. I really didn't. I mean, it was like, why me? Here's a guy with disabilities who can't write, who's given all this revelation, and like, what am I supposed to do with it? And during COVID, in a dream, just before COVID, God told me in the dream that I had a choice, and I asked what the choice was. Actually asked, will anything bad happen if I make the wrong choice? And he said no. But the choice was I could have a life that was very pleasant but went round and round in circles for the rest of my life, or I could have a life that would have an impact that would go beyond my lifespan. And I said, okay, well, what's the decision? And he said to go to Reading. And I said, well, what does go mean? It certainly doesn't mean move. It didn't say move, he said go. So I went, and a long story, we got locked down here in COVID and whatnot. And during that period of time, God started connecting us with people all over the world who have been given part of the same revelation. And the one thing that I seemed to have that they didn't was I had the whole frame. I knew how it worked. And I knew how to put it together, and I actually had the models for how it actually functioned and stuff. But they had all these pieces of it, from law to technology to huge ecosystems of business activity to other things. And we started meeting these people that had this heart. They all wanted to found a colony in a new country that worked a different way, that was a kingdom, at its core. Its economy was for the benefit of everybody. And we started collaborating. And I mean, this is people just like donating time and energy. Some people donating like multiple employees from their business and other things to trying to make this stuff real. And it just kept growing. And initially, God told us not to tell anyone. Don't tell anyone. So it's like, well, how do you grow something when you don't tell anybody? But he figured it out and he started connecting us with people. And during that time, I wrote the book. And I wrote the book once I got released to tell people about stuff. And this has just come out, so this is just like fresh off the press. So I want to tell you where God's doing stuff. If you read the book, there's all sorts of stuff in it that I didn't talk about today. One of the things is treasuries. A treasury is an alternative to the banking system, which doesn't require a central bank, doesn't use cryptocurrency, don't think that's where I'm going, that stores value in real physical things, like commodities, like energy, like currency, can be currency too, that's fine, but which makes its money off of either arbitrage or options, instead of making its money off interest. And if you do this, you can actually have a bank that produces, in essence, a better return for investors than what they would typically get from investing in a bank, and a store of value which can be largely inflation resistant. So you have a mechanism, but it has all the features of today. Okay? And what we found is this incredible guy called Richard Lackey, who is the head of something called the World Food Bank. And the World Food Bank is a bank that stores value in food commodities. In fact, they have the contract with FEMA for the United States and a bunch of other countries, and they store food all over, hundreds of thousands of metric tons all over the United States in case of, hurricanes, disaster, war, whatever, and it's stored in unmarked containers. And they cycle it all the time to provide food to the manufacturers that manufacture food for the school system that the government's Fresh Start program funds. And so this is always turning to keep the stuff fresh. And he was somebody that here God had given me the revelation of how to do this, and he had already done it, and so we met and was like, wow, you're doing it. Okay, we ought to make this happen. Well, we're right now putting in place this treasuries in Zambia and Zimbabwe in the next quarter to actually store value in those countries, which if Tommy lived there, he can tell you inflation was crazy and almost, basically bankrupted the country. And people can actually store their value in non-currency, but still have things that look like a debit card and look like a bank account for all practical purposes. But the value is not stored in all currency, it's stored mostly in commodities. We met a guy by the name of Peter Cunningham and his family, who, if you could ever get the story of Peter Cunningham, and we'll soon, Tommy, have a video on our website, right, to tell Frank, the story of Frank? Yeah, so Frank is this guy who's a farmer. I think Cunninghams are doing this with well over 100,000 farmers in Africa, where they're taking, and they were already applying all the principles, all these kingdom economic principles in their business manually. And what they had, they couldn't scale, but they were doing it manually, and they were already doing it. And what we found is they were taking farmers who, in 2 years, they were taking them from $400 a year of income, subsistence. 4 out of every 5 years, they would be able to produce enough protein to live on. And 1 in every 5 years, they would basically starve. And they were turning them into small lot farmers in 2 years. They had this school that trained people the protocols of God. They were teaching them this stuff. And then they were taking them and putting them out into the field, giving them resources, giving them inputs, they're called, in farming, to be able to start producing. And in 2 years, they were taking them from 400 a year to 400 a month, which basically puts them squarely in the middle class, right? We saw whole valleys where this had been being done and saw people that had gone from poverty, I mean, complete, total poverty. They were building houses. Some people bought cars. Some people had motorcycles. They were putting in wells. They were doing all this stuff to build infrastructure. They were building schools and things for children. So that's one group, and they were already doing it. We also found a group that's basically put together a school in a box that teaches a classic education and is deploying it in Africa as that. So many of the things that I went through here would actually be covered. And it's in a box. They are producing, this guy right here is involved with it, right? Yeah. And it has little, think of them as iPads. They're tablets of Fire tablets in the box. Eric's doing the engineering on the box. They've got these ones they've cobbled together, but they're teaching kids under trees with no teacher. You know why? Because you literally couldn't teach enough teachers or build enough schools in Africa to teach all the people that Africa is going to have in the next 20 years. It's the fastest growing population in human history. 1.6 billion new Africans will be born in the next 27 years, between now and 2050. It will have a greater population than all of Brazil, all of India, and all of China combined. And that's being done by people in this who want to use this system to basically use the points to fund the school and create a utility that provides power, that provides devices, your cell phone, communication network, and everything from the points that you earn by being farmers applying the methods that the farming guys are doing there. We met another group who is building cities, both here in the United States and another one in Africa. A group that's, full-on cities. This is big vision, right? The guys in the United States have built downtown Phoenix. The guys in Africa are building a city for 250,000 people because Africa has to build 250 cities that have 5 million people each, or the equivalent thereof, over the next 20 years to house that population growth. And the average person in those cities will be 9 years old. What? Yeah. Is that amazing? A city for 9-year-olds. That's going to be a fun place to live. We started meeting technology people who have communications technologies, data centers that have distributed ledger projects, that have Web3 systems that they're working on, that have all sorts of different kinds of technology tools, all of which are needed to help this scale quickly and roll out automatedly and be resistant to attack if that ever occurred from governmental actors who would want to stop or corrupt it. And we found people that are building the highest security infrastructure for the U.S. military and for the NSA, who are believers and have they have the best state-of-the-art security infrastructure, bar none, except maybe the Chinese and the Russians, but that's another story, but as good as it gets in the United States or Western Europe. And we met them. We met people who are lawyers, who are constitutional experts in constitutional law in the world. Who would have thought? And people who God has given them the whole legal infrastructure. They knew that it needed to be married with an economy, but they didn't know how to do it. And we met them. And we've met people that are just like normal. People that just hunger for a new place to go, or want to change their city, or who want to live in a world that's just a better place to live in. And so I don't know, some of you might be some of those people, okay? And some of you might be, this session this is the workshop part. So we want to actually hear from you. It's not for me anymore. Because what God has been doing is he's been awakening people, and all we're trying to do is to get them to talk to one another and meet one another. You know, and it's not about us. We're not asking for anything from anybody. You know, we'd love to, have somebody come along and give us a big check that would fund a lot of this stuff. And we thought that's what God wanted to do, but he hasn't done it. And we've put all of our wealth into this, and other people have as well. But we have people in government even. We have a lord from the UK, who is the equivalent of a senator, who, sees this as a piece of the puzzle that he's been given. And so I want to find out who in the room, because what we want to do is enable people to get together and say, hey, what do you have in your hand? Now, if you know anything about, let me tell you something I learned in this process was studying Nehemiah. Nehemiah was the original crowdsourcer. He comes into Jerusalem, finds, the condition, spies out the land, and doesn't tell anybody. He doesn't let anybody know what he's doing. And what he notices is that around everybody's house, there's a pile of rubble that they've already cleaned and sorted and gotten ready, because everybody's building their own house. Everybody's trying to build their own house. And he goes around and he looks at where everything is, looks at the condition of stuff, figures out kind of where all the needs are, and then he says to everybody, hey, if we took the rubble that you already have that's sitting to build your house, and if instead you turned the other way, just turn 180 degrees, and we worked on the wall, we would be able to build the wall. And if we had a wall, you wouldn't have to build as strong a house to protect you, which means it'd be less work, and we'd have a wall. And the reason you want a wall is so that it's safe. So people can't come in and steal stuff or take things out by taking things out they shouldn't, or people can't bring in things into the city that are bad, that are going to hurt. Like bad people coming in to do stuff, or the wrong influences. So what I believe the book is about, and what this workshop is about helping people to realize what rubble they have in front of their own house, and how they could turn 180 degrees with that rubble, and how together we could build the wall. Because we can. And what would happen if we build the wall is we get to live in a new place, a new country, and whatnot. Not being a pilgrim, I can tell you, is hard work. It's tough, man, let me tell you. Building a wall, it's hard work. Particularly in Nehemiah's day, where they had to carry a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other, and you're building this wall up, man, that's tough work. I don't know about that. But anyway, so enough of me talking. I want to have one more slide I'm going to show here. So the Swede economy is a new country, but I'm going to give you another way now of thinking about it besides a country that's maybe more accessible. Think of it as a kingdom version of Amazon, AT&T, B of A, Goldman Sachs, a farming conglomerate, and all the utility companies kind of brought together with a bunch of other stuff sprinkled in. And that's what that's what people are trying to build. But where nobody owns the whole thing, and where the value that is created by this supermax big tech utility farming entity is actually governed by entirely new regulatory laws and agreements. They're based straight out of the Word of God. And where every citizen has ownership in it. Every supplier, every customer, every person who works in this mythical entity has ownership of it. And where that mythical entity actually provides and subsidizes education, healthcare, worship, media that won't poison your soul, and the needy in our societies, the forgotten, the ones that have with something new. And to do that, we have to create this culture of trust. Just like the Israelites needed the Levites, and the early church needed the disciples to create this environment of trust that led to people bringing the things that they had in their hand to the feet of the disciples and creating an environment where nobody had any need. And what are all those things? Well, we need financial services, and there's a whole bunch of financial services that we're building out. We need investment capital. There's a whole bunch of investment capital structures that we're putting together to actually rethink the entire capital markets, bonds, stocks, everything. Because today, as I said, though, here's a shocking statistics. People that would use the label Christian or Jewish, so people that would have a Judeo-Christian ethic, own today 55% of all the wealth owned by people on earth. 55%. Do you want to know where 99% of that money is? It has been given to funds managers in the stock market, in real estate, and in bonds, which combined is 600 trillion of the $700 trillion of wealth in the world. We already control it. It's just we gave it to the wrong people. We just need to take it back and give it to the right people who use it the right ways, okay? Commerce, this is everything from agriculture to mining to logistics to energy to services to retail, all that stuff. Communications, this is everything from data centers to satellite networks to telecommunications to security and cyber infrastructure to all sorts of things that fall under that bucket. Common infrastructure, this is healthcare and education and mentoring and built-in verification and audit systems, because the original auditors in Israel were Levites. And entirely new legal infrastructure. We've got a group working on a new constitution, entirely from Scripture. Entirely new forms of legal agreements. They're balanced between buyers and sellers instead of that, just like Paul said, don't go to the courts. What are you doing going in front of these non-believers to basically deal with your disputes? Basically handle them amongst yourselves. Don't you know someday you're going to judge angels? I don't even know what that means to judge an angel, but that's a scary thought. But anyone I know ever met one fell down and said, "Woe is me." But lawyers and the equivalent of good regulators, not bad regulation is needed for some things in order to set standards, But you don't want bad stuff. The replacement for civil courts, not criminal. That's got to stay with our physical countries, but we don't need to fight civil disputes between ourselves. All that stuff has to be created. So with that, what I'd like to know is from anyone who wants to open up the discussion, throw out what you're involved with, and let's just see how that might tie with the gap that we know exists, or with the group that we know that's doing something. It's time to hear from you. So who would like to volunteer first? Curtis?
So Curtis, and this is my CO, Richie.
Hey, Richie.
And
Scott, sorry, can you pass me the microphone?
Well, do you mind coming up and using the mic? Just right there.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Curtis, and again, that's Richie. And so we have a company called Augment